everyone, it's Gina from orchidandopal.com, and today I am back with another tutorial. This one is from the contents of the recent Potomac Beads monthly subscription box in the Treasure Edition. And if you weren't able to get your hands on that box, but you'd still like to make one of these bracelets, you can check right down below the video where I have all the materials listed and linked. And I'll also leave the link to their subscription down below as well if you're interested in subscribing for future boxes. For a brief rundown of what we'll be using today, you'll need some size 11/0 and size 8/0 seed beads, some 3mm crystal rounds, 4mm round beads such as pearls, 4mm bicones, and 6mm rounds or fire polished faceted round beads. We'll also be finishing this one up with a button style clasp, so I will show you how to go about attaching the button and creating that buttonhole, which will secure the bracelet. And then lastly, the length of the piece we'll be making today is going to be approximately 7¼ inches long. The pink colorway that I have here is the one containing materials that came directly from the subscription package. But I also came up with 2 alternate colorways just based on beads I already had in my stash to give you an idea of what this design would look like if done in other colors. So definitely have fun choosing your materials and feel free to swap out certain things, such as the little 3mm crystal rounds for say 3x2mm crystal rondelles, or the 6mm fire polish for 6mm bicones or something similar. For my beading thread today, I'll be using the 6-pound test 0.006 inch diameter Fireline, and I'll be using a size 11 beading needle. You could also definitely use a size 10 if you'd rather. And we'll just start out with a comfortable length of thread on your needle, whatever that means to you. So for me, it's usually about a wingspan. Once you have all your materials gathered up and your needle is threaded, then we can jump into this tutorial. We'll begin this bracelet by picking up 3 of our pearls, then pick up 1 of your 3mm crystals, a fire polish bead, and 1 more crystal. So once you have that sequence on your needle, you can pull that down, and you're more than welcome to use a stop bead if you'd like to. But I'm just going to sew back through all of those beads once again. And I'm going to hold on to my tail thread, which I've left about 5 inches in length. We're going to start to pull these beads into a loop. And to do that, we just need to sew through that next pearl we get to as well. And just holding both sides of your thread, you can just pull that tight. At this point, I am going to sew underneath that thread bridge and make a loop, and then go through that loop to make a half-hitch knot. And that will just loosely hold everything in place for now. And then I'll continue sewing through the next 2 pearls. Also through the crystal, and down through the fire polish bead. One thing I want to mention is if you are using the light colored crystals like I am, I recommend using a light colored beading thread. I'm just using the black today because of the tutorial and the fact that it's easier for you to see what I'm doing. So now our next step, once we're coming back out of the fire polish bead, is to pick up a crystal, and then we'll pick up 3 pearls and 1 more crystal. You can pull those down. And we're going to sew down through the fire polish bead again, the same direction that we're going in already. And you should have something that looks like this. And in a manner that's similar to right angle weave, if you're familiar with that, we'll just sew through the next crystal and the next 2 pearls. and then pull that nice and tight. So now we're set up for the next step, which is to pick up another 3 pearls. And then sew through the same pearl again that we were just coming out of, going in the same direction. And once again, in that right angle weave technique, sew through the next pearl that you get to, and then sew down through the next one. Hold everything together and pull your thread, and we're ready for the next part of this step. And what we're doing is basically making the base of this bracelet, and we're going to go back and forth a couple times, embellishing the base and adding in additional beads. And what we want to pick up next is basically the opposite of this. So we're going to do a pearl, then a crystal, then a fire polish, a crystal, and another pearl. Now we'll return through the pearl that we were just coming out of, going in the same direction, and we're going to sew through the next pearl and the next crystal, and then up through the next fire polish. And once again, just tighten everything up. So we're just going to repeat this about 6 more times to get the length that we'll be working with today. And just like we did before, when we're coming out of the fire polish, we're going to pick up a crystal, and then we're going to pick up 3 of our pearls and a crystal, return through the fire polish, then sew through the crystal, and then sew through the next 2 pearls. And pull tight. And now, just like we did, we're going to pick up 3 more pearls. Return through the original one. And then sew through the next 2. And then once again, we're going to pick up a pearl, a crystal, a fire polish, a crystal, and 1 more pearl. And sew back through that first one. And now we can head back through that pearl and crystal, and then through the fire polish bead, and continue to repeat this on down the strip. So repeat that now 5 more times, or to your desired length, and I'll meet you back right before we finish this strip of beads. And welcome back. So once you have that length of your beadwork and you've arrived at your last fire polish bead, we're going to finish that up on the other side by picking up a crystal and 3 pearls and 1 more crystal, so just like we did before. And then we'll sew back through the last fire polish bead. Then we'll sew through the crystal and then through the next 2 pearls and pull tight. And at this point, you'll want to gather up your size 8/0 and 11/0 seed beads and also some of your bicones. And with our needle coming out of this last pearl, we're going to pick up 4 of our size 8/0 seed beads. Now sew through that last pearl again, going in the same direction. And those are just wrapping around that last pearl, and we'll come back to this in a later step. At this point, we're going to be sewing towards the other end of our bracelet. So let's continue on by sewing through our next pearl and crystal, and then sew up through the fire polish, and sew through the next crystal. Once you're coming out of that crystal up there, you can pick up an 11/0 and 3/8, and then pick up one more 11/0. We'll slide those down. And we're going to go back through now the crystal that's sitting directly below that fire polish bead on the opposite side. And then we're going to sew back through the fire polish again, through the crystal that's on top, and this is where we're going to add our seed beads on the other side. So just like we did, we'll pick up an 11/0, 3/8, and 1 11/0. And then we're going to sew back through, this time this crystal that's on the bottom, opposite of the one that we're coming out of, and pull that so that they sit on top of the bracelet. Now that we're coming out of this crystal down here, we're going to pick up a new crystal and insert one in between the two that are right there. So now we'll sew through the next crystal, and we'll just pull and pop that one into place right there. Now sew up through the 11/0 and then the next 8/0 seed bead. Skip the 8/0 that comes next, the one that's in the center, and then sew through that third 8/0 and your next 11/0. When you pull that, you can see that that 8/0 in the center is going to stick up a little bit and come to a point, and that's what you want. And you'll also want to sew through your next crystal at this point. Now that you're coming out of that crystal, we want to pick up a new one. We're going to insert one in between these two this time. We'll sew through the next crystal, pull that into place, sew up through our 11/0, the first 8/0, skip the central 8/0, and sew through the third 8/0 and the 11/0, making sure that central 8/0 is sticking out. Now you'll just sew back through those next 3 crystals, heading towards the other side of your bracelet. And now just follow your thread path through these pearls until you get to the next section with the crystals and fire polish. I'm just weaving through, following the thread path, going around, down that one, through the pearl and crystal there, and up through the fire polish, and then out through the crystal on the top left. So at this point, we're going to do the exact same thing around this section, which is to pick up an 11/0 and 3 of our 8/0s and one more 11/0. Then sew back through the crystal that's on the bottom, up through the fire polish, and out through the crystal on the top on the other side. We'll pick up another 11/0, 3 8/0s, and our next 11/0. And then sew through the crystal now that's on the bottom. Now we'll pick up a new crystal and sew through the next one. Just taking a minute to gently pop that into place. Then we'll sew up through the next 2 seed beads, skip the one in the center, and sew through the last 2. And then we'll sew through the crystal. We'll pick up a new crystal then sew through the next, then sew up through the next 2 seed beads, skip the central one and sew down through the last 2 seed beads. Take my needle and just pop that out. And then I'll just continue by sewing through these crystals and following the thread path once again through the pearls to get to the next section where we're going to do the exact same thing. So you can back up the video at this point if you need to, and just follow your beadwork through the pearls to come out of the next crystal to set you up in order to repeat that step again. Go ahead and do that with the remaining 5 sections around the fire polish beads, and at that point we will meet back and continue on with the next steps. Welcome back everyone. So your piece should be looking something like this, and I'm coming out of this final pearl now on this side. To match what we did over on the other side, we're going to pick up 4 of our 8/0s and sew back around that same pearl again. And then this time, sew through the next 2 seed beads, pick up a new 8/0, and sew down the next 2 seed beads. So you have something like that. And now sew back through the pearl and sew through the next 2 seed beads plus the new one that you just added. So we're going to add our button clasp at this location. So if you're using one of those, you can grab that. And we're going to start out by picking up 3 more of our 8/0s. And then sewing through that last 8/0 again. And then sew through the next 8/0, as well as the next one, and pull. And then in this section, we're going to add our button. To do that, we'll pick up 1 8/0. I'm going to go through the single hole of the button, pick up 1 more 8/0, and then I'm going to sew through that original 8/0 again where we started that step and pull all that together. We definitely want to tighten around this though, so I'm going to sew around these seed beads and button again several times. So this is all nice and tight and secure. We want to make sure that's very secure at that location because that's where your bracelet's going to be handled the most. And go down through this section again too, of course, several times, making a couple passes through there. And once you're happy with how secure that is, you can sew down through those next 2 seed beads, and we'll go back up through the pearl and also start to weave our way back over to the crystal section, going through those. And through the next 2 crystals. And then we're going to make our way up through the next 3 seed beads. So I'm going up through the 11/0 and the next 2 8/0s. So I'm coming out of the peak. And I'm going to turn my work this way because it's a little bit easier for me to go in this direction. So at this point, we are going to pick up an 8/0, 2 11/0s, our bicone, 2 11/0s, and 1 8/0. So you should have that sequence on. You can pull that down. And then sew back through the same 8/0 again and pull. So we have this little section that's not secured down yet, and we're going to sew around that, going through the seed beads down through the bicone again. And we're going to go actually around this one more time. So continue on through those next seed beads, the one at the peak, the 3 seed beads after that, and then down through that bicone again. Now we'll be securing this section to the peak over here. And once we're coming out of that bicone, we can pick up 2 of our 11/0s and 1 8/0. And then sew through that peak seed bead, the central one, on the next section to start bringing these areas together. Then you can pick up 1 8/0 and 2 more 11/0s, and then sew down through the bicone. And you're just looping that together now on the other side. And just like we did before, we're going to go through this area one more time just to make sure it's nice and secure. And then back down the bicone. And then back through the 2 11/0s and the next 8/0. This time skip the 8/0 at the peak and go through the next 8/0 on the other side and the next 11/0. Make sure you pull all this nice and tight. And now I'm coming out of that first 11/0. That second one is just hanging out there. Just come out the first one and then pick up one more 11/0, an 8/0, and an 11/0. Then skip over those next several beads and just sew through the last 11/0 on this side and the next 8/0. There we go. Now skip that central 8/0 and just sew through the next one as well as the next 11/0. And on this side, pick up an 11/0, an 8/0, and an 11/0. Skip over these next couple of seed beads and simply go down the last 11/0 and the next 8/0. So now you have these beads in place in that diamond-like shape. And I just like to do one more little step, and that is skipping over that peak 8/0 again, sewing through the 8/0 and the next 2 11/0s up to those new beads we added. Then skip the new 8/0 that we added, sew down through the next 2 11/0s and the next 8/0. And that just sharpens the point of that little diamond shape. And then on this side, skip the peak 8/0, sew through the next 8/0 and 2 11/0s. Skip that 8/0, and then sew through the next 2 11/0s. And then this time you can sew through the 8/0 and then the 8/0 on the peak. And we're going to continue to sew through our work towards the other side to get into position to start our next section, just like that. So we'll continue on going through the crystals, just following our thread path. And then you can sew through your next 11/0 and the next 2 8/0s to be coming out of the peak 8/0 at that next section, which is right there. So you're going to do the exact same thing that we did in order to add another diamond section. So once again, just back up the video if you need to. Add another one of these sections in, right in that location, as well as these 4 locations after that. And once you have added those and they are in place, we'll meet back and finish up this bracelet. And welcome back, everyone. So once you have made your way back to the other side of the piece and your bracelet is looking like this, you should be in good shape. We're ready to add the loop on to this end of our bracelet, so we have something to secure that button to. So I have actually made my way through the rest of the beads so that I'm coming out of the second 8/0 seed bead here on the end, and that's where we're going to pick up one new 8/0 and sew through the next two. Then we'll sew back through the pearl, and we'll sew through the next 3 8/0s so that we're coming out the one that's at that peak. So at this end of the bracelet, we're going to be picking up 21 of our 8/0s. Now that's very specific to the size of this particular button, which will work if that's the one that you have and that's the one you're using today. Now, if you're not using the same button, that's okay too. You'll just want to play around with the size loop that you'll need in order to fit over the button that you're using, but also not be too loose to where it adds too much of a gap in your bracelet or your button could easily slip out. So 21 seemed to be the sweet spot for this situation, and that's what I'm going to pick up now. And then just go ahead and sew through that original 8/0 again at the peak. And you should have a loop like this. And then you'll want to sew around this section at least 3 more times. You want it to be very strong here since you're going to be fooling with that section a little bit more with the button and getting that in place and everything, or whoever is going to be wearing this. You want to make sure that that doesn't come apart or get strained there in any way. So just keep going around, make sure you don't miss any beads as you're going around that loop once again and the subsequent times. And when you're done, you can just make several half-hitch knots. I'm making one right there in the corner where I'm coming out of that 8/0, and then I'm just going to sew through a few more beads. I'm going to sew underneath that thread bridge, make a loop there and make a knot, and sew through a few more, and just do that several times to secure your working thread so that you'll be able to trim off the excess. Probably do one more right here. And then I'll just end by sewing back through these 8/0s, and I'm going to weave back through the next few beads just a little bit more. And I'll go down the fire polish, and this is where I'll trim the excess. So that is our bracelet with the button clasp as well. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I'm always thrilled to have you here, and thank you so much for joining me. You'll have to let me know in the comments below if you plan to make one of these, or if you have given it a try, let me know how it went. As a reminder, you can find the full list of materials right down below the video in the description section, and also have fun changing up the colors you decide to use and the buttons for clasps to add your own spin on things. If you enjoyed today's video, feel free to give it a big thumbs up and also subscribe to my channel while you're here if you haven't already, because I'd love to have you back. And please feel free to share the video with your other beading friends, wherever that may be. Until next time, I'll see you all again real soon. I hope you have a fabulous rest of your day, and as always, happy beading.